Awesome, so you've found the second video in the itemization series where I walk you through everything you need to know about items in Dota 2. If you struggle to work out what to buy at the beginning of a game, then watch this video, as you'll get a much deeper understanding of why starting items are important, the different strategies behind the items you may choose, as well as some other tips and tricks along the way. Alright, so what makes starting items so important? Well, everyone starts out with 600 gold to buy starting items with, but there are many potential starting items to choose from, and it can sometimes be difficult to decide what would be best to buy. Also, I find that many beginners don't understand the concept of buying cheap items that don't do that much, when you can just buy item components for bigger items that you'll end up getting later in the game. I know that when I started out, I used to do this and just buy boots or something like that, but the problem is that it leaves you weak in lane. Sure, there might be instances that boots can be okay depending on the matchup, but they don't really help you in lane except to run away when you get low on health. Doing this though just means you are leaving the lane and losing valuable golden experience, leaving you weaker than your opponents who are still in the lane. That's why it's important to carefully select your early game items so you can survive and excel throughout the laning stage to set yourself up for the rest of the game. There are a bunch of factors to take into account when buying your starting items, but your selection will generally consist of a combination of similar item types for each hero. You can choose from regen items, stat items, utility items, or one of the other aggressive or defensive items to help you dish out or reduce early game harass. There are also fairly generic options that you can pick which are usually decent enough for any hero selection, but could be further optimized if you take into account some of the other factors. One of the pretty standard generic starting builds consists of 2 sets of tangos for 6 in total, a healing salve, 2 iron branches, a couple of mana potions and a mango. This gives you a good amount of overall regen for both mana and health, as well as 2 to each stat in the iron branches, which you can then turn into a magic wand. Obviously, this is an all-round decent set of starting items, but what if you needed some extra damage for last hitting? Or maybe you're an aggressive offlaner and you want to try for some early kills? Well, then you need to start looking at all the factors that can influence your buying decisions. And no, I'm not talking about ads you might see, however clever the marketing is. No, I'm talking about analysing the match factors like who the enemies are and what lanes they might be in. Is your lane matchup going to be favourable to your hero, or might the enemy have the upper hand? Also, what about your playstyle? Do you want to be aggressive or just focus as much as possible on last hits and ignore the enemy most of the time? When deciding what to buy, try to think about all of the things that could affect your laning stage and try to factor those things into your starting items that you purchase. If you are going to have a hard lane with lots of harass, get more health regen so you can stay in lane longer. But maybe you've got a lane where you've got lots of kill potential. I'd probably get more mana regen in this case so you can be casting spells to get kills over and over again. Or maybe you just want to concentrate on getting last hits, so buy some stat items or Quelling Blade for extra damage. I will explain the most typical items to you shortly, but occasionally there are times where you might want to purchase items with auras that are usually part of a bigger recipe as a starting item. This can sometimes work, though it's not as common to see, but I will talk about these ones briefly throughout the video as they come up, just so you can understand why you might want to go with one of these as a potential starting item. Anyway, let's go through an example. Say you are a safe lane Phantom Assassin and you have a Lion as your support hero. Phantom Assassin is fairly weak early game and can be burst down pretty quick, so you've got to be careful in lane. Now you've looked at the enemy lineup and it looks like they will have an Underlord Mirana lane, which is a pretty rough matchup for PA. Your wave is likely to be constantly pushed into your tower and you will soak quite a bit of damage from the creeps, as well as harass from the Mirana and Underlord's Firestorm. Not to mention the Atrophy Aura will be sapping some of your damage to make it even more difficult to last hit. Line might help some, but there is almost no chance that you will get a kill on the enemy without backup, so you should focus on last hitting. Here you are going to need some last hitting power and also a bunch of regen. I would probably get 6 tangos, a healing salve, a quelling blade, and probably 3 iron branches. Why 3 iron branches? Well, these can be planted in the ground and eaten with a tango, healing you for double the amount a normal tree would. The other 2 I would end up turning into a magic wand to help replenish a small amount of health and mana from the spells that Underlord is going to be spamming. Now, what about if in the last example you are facing up against a Techies and a Nature's Prophet? Well, now your lane is probably going to be a lot easier and you could afford to be a bit more aggressive on the enemy, as long as you are careful to watch out for Techies mines. With a few levels, you and Lion could probably get close to killing either of the heroes if they're not at full health, so your playstyle might be more aggressive than the last example. Also, farming is going to be slightly easier as you won't be zoned out as far. However, a lot of harass can come out from the Nature's Prophet treants if you let them attack you over and over, but you can kill them fairly easily with help from Lion if needed. Even though the matchup is a lot easier, in this case I'd probably buy quite similar starting items as last time. I'd go with 6 tangos, a healing salve, a quelling blade, but instead of the 3 iron branches, I'd probably get a slippers of agility so that I can build it into a wraith band to last hit harder and do some extra damage to the enemy. The starting items don't drastically change obviously, but you probably still need reasonable regen to keep yourself in the lane, although you might be able to get away with 3 tangos and more stat items to start with. If it was me, I'd probably get the extra regen, but you can always courier yourself more if needed. There are heaps of starting items you can choose from, so I'll go through each one and explain them a bit more to give you an idea of the selection and why you might pick one over another. First I'll go through the regen items, but it's important to always remember to buy some regen at the start of the game. Staying in lane early game is super important so that you don't miss out on vital early experience and gold, as you need this to help set you up for the rest of the game. Alright, so first up are tangos. Tangos are extremely versatile items which can be used on a tree, consuming the tree and slowly healing you up over a 16-second period. The main benefit of these is that you can eat them when still in lane and near creeps, and you don't need to worry about the healing effects being lost if an enemy attacks you. As I mentioned earlier, tangos can be used to eat iron branch trees to heal you for double the normal amount. Buying one set of tangos gives you 3 charges to use, and you almost always want at least a set of these, unless you are mid and your teammates have given you tangos, but more on that in video 4. Next up we have the healing salve, which heals you up quite a lot over a short period of time, but the danger here is if you take any damage from enemy heroes, the heal is dispelled and you won't receive the full healing effect. So just be careful when popping this one, that you are out of range of any potential enemy attacks or spells. A healing salve is really useful sometimes when you're running away from enemies and they just can't quite hit you, and you can top yourself up quite a lot, which means you're probably more likely to survive if they do end up catching you. One healing item that is situationally picked up is the Fairy Fire. This one is quite unique in that it will heal you instantly instead of over a period of time for just under 100 health, and can be used in clutch situations where an enemy might be about to kill you and then used to survive with the tiniest amount of life left. It can be extremely useful to play mind games with your enemy, but is usually only done once at the most per game, as the cost for the amount healed is quite high. Now, as an unconventional regen item, you might decide to pick up a Ring of Regen, which gives you a passive 2 health per second regen. This is quite decent and means you don't need to spend so much on health regen consumables. However, the main reason you'd pick this up is if you are going to build it into a headdress. Now remember how I mentioned aura items earlier? Well, headdress is an item which grants 3 to your attributes and also a 2 HP per second regen aura, which heals yourself as well as nearby teammates. You could also potentially pick this up as a starting item, as the healing can be really beneficial if you are laning with a teammate, and it can be even more beneficial if you plan to build a mechanism or guardian greaves later in the game. It is not too expensive, but can mean that if you run out of regen items and are low, you are out of action for a few minutes unless you deliver more regen on the courier. The last healing item is arguably the most useful, and that is the bottle. This item is really handy as it can be refilled by going back to the fountain, by picking up a rune, or by giving it to your teammate who has just teleported to your tower from the fountain and then giving it back to you. The bottle has 3 charges and heals a small amount of health as well as mana on each charge. This is a great item, but is really only picked up when it can be easily refilled, such as if you're the mid hero or a roaming hero. The regeneration effect from the bottle can be dispelled if you're attacked by an enemy hero, similar to that of a healing salve, so just keep this in mind if you're about to use it. Now, from time to time, you might see players dropping 1 or more of their items before using the bottle. Why do they do this? I'm so glad you asked. When you use the bottle, you regen a certain amount of health and mana, and since this number is constant, the percentage regen is higher if your health and mana pools are smaller. So if you have items which boost your health or mana, you can drop them, use the bottle, and then once the regeneration effect is worn out, you can pick your items back up and your health pool and mana pool will be higher than if you didn't drop the items. Be careful doing this though, as items dropped on the ground can be stolen or destroyed by enemies, so make sure you're safe before doing this. That's pretty much it for the standard health regen items, so let's look at mana regen. We already touched on the bottle, which is a combination of health and mana regen, but after that you've got the mana potions. These work a lot like the healing salve, as it restores a large portion of mana over a period of time and dispels if attacked by an enemy hero. The time period over which it restores mana is larger than a healing salve however, and makes them more useful if you are not in urgent need of mana, but rather to bump you up if you are not in combat. For emergency instant mana, you want to get yourself a mango. These juicy delicious treats instantly restore about 1 spell's worth of mana, which is great if you're a mana intensive hero and could use the extra spell to save an ally or get a crucial stun off to secure a kill. Mangoes also grant 0.6 HP regen, and you can stack up to 3 mangoes in one slot, which makes them handy for heroes like Pudge, who can use the HP regen as well as consuming a mango if he needs it for a hook. Another unconventional item you might consider as a starting item is a Sage's Mask. This one grants you 0.75 mana regen per second, but is usually built into another aura item, the Ring of Basilisk, which you might also consider as a starting item if you and your teammate want to be able to cast your spells a little more often. This is not a good starting item if you're in a solo lane, but it can be great when you've got a teammate in your lane, especially in the off lane where you can use the spells to be more aggressive. Now as a heads up, sometimes you might have more than 6 items and are holding the extras in your backpack. I find this often happens on support heroes, where you might have your wards in your inventory, a smoke in your backpack and a healing salve in your backpack as well, plus boots, some tangos, wand, etc. that take up the rest of your inventory. If you need to use your healing salve in your backpack, there is really no trick to getting to use it any faster, as you need to wait the full 6 seconds cooldown once you've moved it into your inventory. You just need to decide which item you are least likely to need for the 6 seconds after once you swap it back in. You could potentially drop your inventory item on the ground, wait 6 seconds, use the salve and then pick the dropped item up once the salve is used and access it immediately, but the risk of an enemy destroying or taking it is too high and I wouldn't do this. As far as stats items go, you've got a few items that are typically purchased at the start of the game. The most common is probably the Iron Branch, or DG Branch as it used to be called in the early Dota days. This one gives you 1 to every stat for just 50 gold. For the amount of stats it gives, it's super cost effective. However, they do take up a lot of space in your inventory, and you usually want to replace them with stronger items or upgrade them into a magic wand, or potentially plant them in the ground and eat them. These ones give a small boost to your agility, strength and intelligence, and although it's not much, each little bit helps to give you an edge in the lane. Similar to the GG branch is the Circlet, however this one is about 3 times as expensive and only gives 2 to each stat. The benefit of this one though is that they can be upgraded into one of 3 other early game items, which are commonly purchased to boost your stats in the early to mid game. For strength, you have the Gauntlets of Strength. These ones boost your strength by 3, which gives a small increase to your health and also damage if you are a strength hero. They can be upgraded into a Bracer as a stronger stat item, which grants 6 points to strength and 3 to each of the other attributes. Bracers are sometimes seen on strength heroes to give them an early stat boost, but are also really good on support heroes to help boost their health pool to make them a little bit tankier in the early game. The Gauntlets can also be upgraded into a Soul Ring, which temporarily boosts mana at the sacrifice of health. The Slippers of Agility are for the intelligence stat item. Nah, I'm just messing with you. Clearly, these grant plus 3 to your agility attribute, which increases your armor and defense against physical attacks slightly. These are also quite common on agility carry heroes as a starting item to help boost their damage for last hitting. These ones upgrade into the Wraith Band, which grants 6 to your agility and 3 to your other 2 attributes. Wraith Bands are quite strong for their cost, and it is worthwhile picking them up if you are an agility carry and need to boost your damage as well as some minor boosts to your health and mana in the early game until you can fill those slots with stronger items. And the last stat item you might consider is the Mantle of Intelligence. This one boosts your intelligence by 3 points, which increases your mana pool, marginally increases your spell damage, and also grants an extra 3 damage if you're an intelligence hero. These aren't often picked up except by mid-intelligence heroes who need the extra damage for last hitting. This one upgrades into the Null Talisman, which can sometimes be picked up as a starting item by mid laners instead of other items, especially if your teammates have given you tangos and you will be buying a bottle. Utility items are often items which are purchased and consumed for a specific purpose. The first obvious utility items are Observer Wards and Sentry Wards. Wards are a topic on their own, and I've actually created a guide in another video for this, so make sure you check that one out if you haven't already. I'll put a link in the description. Anyway, Observer Wards give vision over an area, and you will want to pick these up if you're a support hero throughout the match, but typically the mid hero will want a mid ward, and then either safe lane or off lane can have the other one. Usually I'll give this to the off lane so that they can block the pull or protect themselves from ganks. Sentry Wards on the other hand reveal invisible enemies and wards in an area around themselves. As a support, you might want to pick one of these up at the start of the game for dewarding, but especially if one of the enemies is an invisible hero like a Weaver, a Treant, or a Bounty Hunter. Alternatively, you could try Dust of Appearance if you are confident that you can use this and secure a kill on an invis hero. When you use Dust, it coats the area in, dust, and any invisible hero in the area will be revealed for a short period of time. This one is not as often picked up as a starting item, as a Sentry Ward is probably better, but if you think that your Sentry will be dewarded and you want to get the kill, pick up a Dust instead of a Sentry. Usually though, Sentry is better because you can deward or block neutral cancel with them as well, so they're just a little bit more versatile. Now the Quelling Blade is a very common last hitting item, picked up mostly by carry heroes, but sometimes offlaners or melee mid heroes. This one grants a huge boost to your damage against creeps, which makes last hitting a lot easier, but also enables you to cut down trees, which is handy to create shortcuts for pulling creeps, running through the jungle, or if you are trying to run away and juke the enemy. Now the magic stick could also be a starting item if you're going into a lane with a spell spammer hero like a Bristleback, and is extremely handy against these hero types. This one stores charges per nearby enemy spellcast and can be activated to use the charges to restore a small portion of health and mana per charge. It can be upgraded into a magic wand, which is super useful on almost all heroes in the early to mid game. Teleport scrolls can also be considered a utility item, as they are used to move yourself around the map. You start the game off with 3 teleport scrolls, but will need to purchase more as you use them up. Make sure you always have at least one on you at all times, as there is not much worse than being stuck on the other side of the map and having to run back to defend your base, or painfully watch a teammate being dived by the enemy, knowing you could have saved them if only you had a teleport scroll. Now the last utility item, the Smoke of Deceit, is quite situational as a starting item, but can be very good if you are with a well coordinated team, as you can group up immediately to gank a set of bounty runes. The Smoke of Deceit hides you and your teammates until you get within a 1025 radius of an enemy tower or enemy hero, which means you can get the jump on the enemies for first blood, as well as securing 2 early bounty runes if everything goes to plan. Alternatively, you can also use the smoke to cover your tracks while placing an Observer Ward, as these can be easily dewarded early if the enemy sees them being placed. Keep in mind that you should also be purchasing your starting items in the strategy screen before the game actually starts, especially if you're looking to smoke gank, as getting out into the map faster is important to get better positioning. And the last type of starting items is a bit weird, but I've just listed them as aggressive or defensive options. They are quite situational, as they can be expensive items to start with, but sometimes help you turn early trades to your advantage. There is the Orb of Venom, which, for half of your starting gold, applies a small damage over time debuff to the enemy, but more importantly applies a slow, which allows you to chase them more easily and get extra attacks in on them. This can be handy if you're a hero that trades physical attacks well, such as an Ogre Magi, as you can generally man-fight them until they start running away while getting extra attacks in as they run. Next up is the Blightstone, which, again for half of your starting gold, reduces the enemy's armor by 2. This can be quite significant early game against enemies which have very low base armor and can boost your damage against them quite a bit. I find it most useful on heroes which deal pretty reasonable damage with their auto attacks, but could use the extra armor reduction to help deal a little bit extra per attack. On the defensive side, you've got the Ring of Protection, which counters the Blightstone perfectly by granting an extra 2 armor. I don't see this bond picked up very often, except when it is going to be upgraded into an early buckler, or built into a Vladimir's offering, or potentially an Urn of Shadows later in the game. Anyway, it could be picked up if you are expecting high damage from physical attacks, but usually extra regen or stat items are bought instead. Now, I did mention the buckler before, which is actually another aura item which you might consider purchasing as a starting item. This one can work really well in the off lane as it grants 2 armor to all nearby allies. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it for starting items. In the next episode, we will be covering the strategies and items you can use as a support hero and how different factors might affect your item decisions. Awesome, don't forget to drop the video a like, share it with your noob friends, and also subscribe to my channel and ring the bell for notifications so you are instantly alerted when the next video in the series is released. Let me know if there is anything in particular you want covered in the next support video, and I'll see what I can do about answering that for you. Thanks everyone, I'm Defied and happy gaming.